Hello and a very warm welcome to the brand new edition of Policy Watch. I'm Kriti Mishra. In today's episode, we'll take a closer look at the National Green Aviation Policy. The government has put up a white paper on this policy for public comments. This white paper sets out a strategic framework to address the major environmental challenges of the aviation industry. It comprehends the key environmental issues and emphasizes the government's approach towards environment protection. The Civil Aviation Ministry will create a simplified regulatory regime to speed up clearances for airport development and other aviation projects while taking due care of environment sustainability. Green aviation is the pursuit of reduction in noise, greenhouse gas emissions and fuel usage. And to know more about the topic, I'm joined by Dr. Ankur Bhatia, aviation expert, and also by Mr. R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow, TERI. Welcome to Rajya Sabha Television, both of you. Dr. Bhatia, let me come to you first. Aviation is one of the fastest growing sources of greenhouse gas emission and accounting for nearly 2% of emissions. Talking about India specifically, India is expected to be the third largest air passenger market very soon. Looking at this robust growth, how important is this green aviation policy for our country?
I think it is very, very important, specifically for the fact that the industry is in its nascent stage in India and it's getting developed. There is a requirement for various new airports to come in. There's a requirement of new planes to come in. But the good part about it is that whatever greenfield development is happening right now, it's happening now. And with the strong focus of NGT and other green norms, the development is being done keeping in mind the environmental impact. The other good part about it is that the new planes, obviously because it's a new and a growing economy, we'll have to have new planes. And all the new planes which are coming in are definitely much more fuel efficient and noise compliant with the global norms related to green aviation. I'd also like to add that the focus now with the major airports being in the center of cities, specifically with Delhi and Bombay, I think these two cities will have this challenge in the future because there are a lot of NGOs and all who are actually already pegging the fact that there should be a night curfew, there should be a different pattern for the planes to leave and arrive from the airport. I think this is something which will get ironed. We must keep in mind that the globally developed airports, specifically example of Heathrow and other city airports, do have night curfews, which is not prevalent right now in majority of the Indian airports. So I think this is something which, when policy is actually put in, will be unfolded in the future.
Absolutely. So this policy is expected to address the environmental challenges in the aviation ecosystem. And joining me on the debate is also Mr. Sanat Kaul, Chairman, International Foundation for Aviation Development. Welcome to Rajya Sabha TV, sir. Sir, we were talking about the challenges, the environmental challenges in the aviation industry. And also here, I'd like to point out that ICAO has already said that the aviation industry should be ready for consequences of climate change. Now, looking at that, how important is it for us to have a policy and also use policy tools and clean technology to ensure that our carbon emissions are reduced?
Actually, this should be taken for aviation. The issue of environment should be taken at two levels. One is at the ground level and one is at the atmospheric level, where upper atmosphere and stratosphere comes in. At the ground level, the emissions are also again in two lots. One is the gases which are expelled by aircraft, and the other is the noise. So noise is one aspect where night curfews are there in many Western countries, and perhaps they also lead to disruption of traffic because certain airports are closed at night. But the other side is, and of course over time, the engine noise has come down tremendously. The engine manufacturers have made sure that the noise comes down. So that's one very good thing.
All right, there seems to be some disturbance there. I'll come to you, Mr. Rashmi. ICAO has pointed out of severe consequences of climate change. But how important is this policy for India to meet its intended nationally determined contributions, or INDCs as we call it?
Right. In fact, the significance of this policy, the first draft which has come out, has to be understood in the context of the measures taken by ICAO. You know, the India has volunteered to become a part of the second phase of the CORSIA scheme, as it's called, the carbon offset reduction scheme for this international civil aviation. So we have undertaken a binding obligation, more or less. Right now we are in the voluntary phase. First phase is voluntary, but from 2027 onwards, we will become a part of a binding phase in which we have to maintain the carbon neutrality of our growth in the civil aviation sector. And so it's good that the ministry has come out with a white paper now to prepare itself, for the future work that we will have to do in the next 5 to 6 years, and build the required infrastructure, the systems, so that we can maintain this carbon neutrality. Now, how do we do that? As Mr. Kaul was pointing out, the action has to be actually taken at 3 levels, not 2, because first is the airports. Airports are large consumers of energy. Aircrafts, how they fly, they use fossil fuels. I mean, they use fuel, and that is the 95% of the total emissions of the civil aviation sector come out of the fuel consumption by the airplanes. And the systems, the management systems, the navigation system, the supporting services, and all that. So at all these 3 levels we will have to operate. And this green aviation, the policy which has been put out, in fact there are 10 or 12 different areas which they try to target. The noise is one of them, but most important is the energy efficiency. The energy which the airports consume in both ground handling and the support services, the buildings itself, the large infrastructures, and the way the aircraft operations take place. So we have to optimize the energy consumption, maybe effect a fuel switch, and see that we reduce the carbon emissions. So when we finally get into the CORSIA scheme and under the binding obligations of ICAO, we should be prepared to reduce our emissions in a manner that we help the economy as well as the environment.
Absolutely. So action has to be taken on 3 levels. I'll take the next question to Dr. Bhatia. Dr. Bhatia, India has already joined the elite group of nations to operate a flight on alternative fuel. Last year in the national capital, a flight that was partially powered by biofuel landed in the national capital from Dehradun. But tell me, are flights ready to be operated to take off on alternative fuels?
Well, there is definitively a lot of work which is happening on this regard, on alternate fuel, and the commercial viability of this is yet to be established. The viability of this to happen is just to establish, but there is definitive work on that. I think what I'm going to more point out in this regard is one of the things which obviously has got missed right now is the efficiencies of the airports as such. If you see, there's when aircrafts actually come to the metro airport, specifically Delhi and Bombay, on a lot of occasions, specifically in Bombay, there is a lot of time when the aircraft's actually holding up. Now, when an aircraft actually is held up for even 1 minute, the kind of emissions what it is actually giving out, and that on top of cities, because a lot of holding patterns are sometimes also located on top of polluted or on populated areas. So, I think that is something else which needs to be looked into, because obviously if you're signing that and you're getting into this binding agreement in the next 7 to 8 years, you need to ensure that there is an efficiency and there is an ample amount of infrastructure available for the growth which is upcoming. But yes, having said that of course, if there's work happening on alternate fuels, if there's work happening on even electrical flights, which a lot of work is actually happening around the globe as well, I think this will only help the cause of the growth, the cause of the industry, and specifically in India, where we are just at a very nascent stage right now for aviation, and there is a lot of area to grow on.
Right. So the challenge is to make biofuels commercially viable. Also joining me is Dr. Kaul again. Dr. Kaul, you were telling me about policy tools to reduce carbon footprint in India. Go ahead, sir.
Well, see, one of the things is what was mentioned, biofuels. Now, biofuels have to be sustainable. And how do you create them? And you make them out of crops, of jet straws, and even seaweeds and other things. Those are all experimental. one flight has taken off between Delhi and Dehradun, but that's just a demonstration flight. It has no economic meaning, it has no sustainability. Many countries are trying it out, and it might happen soon that we might be able to mix fuel, normal petroleum fuel, with these chemical fuels, not chemical fuels, these agricultural products which produce fuels, which are known as biofuels. So I hope this happens, but this is actually linked up with a whole lot of research going on around the world. What India can do to improve its lot is either to look into the
We've lost the connection yet again, and I'll take that to Dr. Rashmi. Sir, you were telling me about biofuels and also about making them commercially viable. What do we need to do to make them commercially viable in the aviation sector?
In fact, as part of the sustainable or green policy for civil aviation sector, biofuel is the only choice at the moment, but it's technologically not affordable, and it's not in fact it's not a viable technology at the moment, because we can't produce the required quantity. But certainly we can take a baby step in that direction. We can invest in the R&D, research and development for this technology. The biofuels can be generated from biomass, or sugarcane is one of the possible sources. In other countries around the world, it has been done with maize. So there are different kinds of crops which can be, but of course we have to balance the food security issues.
Exactly.
So it is not so easy. So development of technology in the biofuel sector is very important. Fortunately, our government has also come out with a biofuel policy.
Exactly.
So
right.
they are trying to figure out what is the most feasible, most viable method of encouraging this technology. So hopefully, if that succeeds, that will feed into the green aviation policy and help the airplanes use or make a required fuel switch. But even in the best scenarios, we cannot use more than 10 to 20% of the total fuel with the use of biofuel. We cannot go beyond that. In fact, one of the targeted aims is to bring down our imported fuel by only 10% by 2022. So obviously, this kind of fuel switch is not beyond the range of 20%. So the 80% will still be fossil fuel. So there is a limit to which actually we can effect the fuel switch. We have to understand that, and that will depend on the international collaboration, the kind of international movement which takes place. So we have to be a part of a global coalition for that. In the short term, I think we need to focus on the other areas, and airports, the infrastructure around the airports, which are very large energy guzzlers. We have to make them energy efficient, and there are ways of doing that. The infrastructure itself, the buildings which are constructed, they have to be green. We can do green rating of these buildings, either LEEDs or GRIHA rating can be adopted for that. The support services around the airports, they can be electrified. The solar energy can be the platform around which the airport ecosystem can be built. So we can bring down the energy consumption. We can feed the energy requirement of the airports with the help of renewable energy, which is possible because it has become viable now, although there are integration issues in the grid. But electrification of the airport systems is the first major challenge which we have to meet. And I think in the short term, we have to look at those issues of green infrastructure and infusing renewables into the airport ecosystems.
You talked about green infrastructure. Now, the white paper also mentions green infrastructure. What exactly is green infrastructure as far as the aviation industry is concerned?
No, basically using more environment-friendly materials and reducing the consumption of energy in construction and maintenance of the buildings. That is what a green infrastructure means. And infrastructure has to be resilient enough to withstand the climate change, the variations in the weather and the climate. And it has to be least expensive, but at the same time it has to be environment friendly. So we have to find environment friendly materials for building the infrastructure which use less energy, less emissions, and in maintaining those buildings also, in running those buildings also, we should use energy through sources which are less environmental polluting. So basically, reducing the pollution load of these buildings and making them more energy efficient is the way forward. And there are when the environmental clearance is accorded, at that time these considerations are gone into. Hopefully, as part of this green policy, these norms will become much more important, much more visible, and much more enforceable.
Right, so the infrastructure should be green and should also be resilient. Dr. Kaul, I'll come to you again. How do we make green taxing more feasible to ensure that the ground emissions are reduced?
Yeah. Yeah, see, this is the main issue, that what is the percentage of ground emissions compared to the total emissions given out by aviation. Now, that's not very clear, but green emissions are somewhat, the infrastructure for the ground-based emissions are somewhat in our control. As far as biofuels are concerned, it's a very major research issue, and it may not be possible to do it. Now, green infrastructure can be done for everything. There is a way of calculating how much emissions are given out.
Yes, sir. The connection is lost again. Dr. Bhatia, I'll come to you now. Dr. Kaul was also talking about making green taxing more feasible. What is your take on that?
It is definitely under the control of actually developing green terminals, green airports. The new developments can, because obviously the aviation enclaves or the airports have a lot of area which can be used for solar panels. So, you could generate a lot of that. But then, one of the things which, from an industry or a travel point of view, what people do is that they contribute to, there are various companies in the world, and our company also does that and offers that service to the travelers, is that there is a possibility that the green, the carbon emissions are actually calculated for every journey which an individual traveler undertakes. And equivalent amount of, the cost which is related to that, for example, of renewing it by planting a tree or any other activity which can be done to match that particular emission, that money is actually used after it's collected for that. So this is one thing that can be done to tax if there is an emission happening, and to have an alternate or to renew that particular damage which might be occurred because of the travel of an individual on a particular flight. So this is one bit of it, but I think a lot of work in terms of LEED. I mean, I have two hotels near the proximity of Delhi Airport. Both are LEED certified. We are the only ones who are LEED certified in this area of AeroCity. And it is not difficult. It just takes a little bit more effort. It just takes a little bit more, it's a bit more expensive, but on a long term actually pays you back to ensure that whatever infrastructure is being developed is keeping the environment in mind, ensuring that there is ample amount of, at the end of the day, if you don't give it back to the environment, the sustainability of those projects is despite of policies or no policies, but this is an effort which an individual, an airport developer, or any other infrastructure developer should keep in mind while putting a new infrastructure in.
Dr. Bhatia, you also mentioned about solar energy. Now, what are the steps that the government can take to promote usage of renewables in the aviation ecosystem?
Right. I think, as I mentioned to you, airports have large acreage of land around them. So it is, and I'm not sure any bits of those are actually, or percentile of those, even terminal buildings, on top of terminal buildings, any bits of those, I think if you look at the percentage of that being actually used to generate solar energy, I think it'll be 2 or 3%. Now that rooftops, the free land, all of that can actually contribute to a fair amount of bit that actually you can make these airports self-sustainable of doing that. And I think this is what the policy should indicate, that if there is a possibility, and there is definitively a possibility of all new developments, of all new terminal buildings, and of course all the free land which is there to actually generate a lot of green energy which can be used for the development of the airports. Also vehicles which are flying in the airports or around the airports or servicing, a lot of these vehicles are getting to become electric already around the world. I think Schiphol is one of the airports where all the transit buses, or I think majority of them, have become all electric. I think these all things would also have to be deployed by the government in majority of the airports, at least because that's definitely under control. And it is the cost of actually renewing whenever there's a replacement of any internal combustion vehicle that has to happen in the airport. It should be done with an electric vehicle. So all of these things will ultimately contribute to a lot of greening of that infrastructure.
Right, so the entire supply chain has to be strengthened. Mr. Rashmi, there's another important issue that we need to address, and that is of noise pollution, which is one of the major health hazards around the airports. How do we minimize or mitigate the impact of noise pollution around airports?
You see, all over the world, these considerations are taken into account when building the airports and creating the infrastructure around these such airports. The difficulty in our country is that our country is a heavily populated country. It's a very densely populated country, and most of the airports, despite our best efforts, are close to human habitation. So we have to invest in this technology. There is no dearth of technology here. It's all a question of investing in the required infrastructure to insulate the people from the noise, and the noise levels are prescribed by the local pollution authorities. The state pollution control boards are and the central pollution control board have already laid down the norms for the noise levels around the airports. It's a question of enforcing them and insulating the inconvenience to the but it means both ways, creating the required insulation and at the same time locating the airports away from the human habitation, and also ensuring that the flights do not take off and land at times when they create maximum inconvenience. Unfortunately, given the increasing passenger load in our country, we have to live with this difficulty for some time, and it may not be possible. Although it is one of the objectives of the green policy, I think it will take a little longer time than usual to really enforce these noise standards in our country.
But we need to invest in technology, and we need to invest in R&D. I'll give you the last word, Dr. Bhatia. The white paper also talks about creating center of excellence for green aviation. Now, what would be the objective of such centers? Last 30 seconds, Dr. Bhatia.
Best practices, essentially. I think in order to see what globally people are doing for greening of the terminal buildings, greening of the airports, greening of the other infrastructure, also for noise barriers around the airports, because obviously a lot of other airports also have that same effect of noise with living within habitable enclaves. I think if we could take those best practices which are happening across the world and put up a center which could make a Bible for any new development or upgradation of the development, I think that will really help in ensuring that the policy, when it is defined and it's done, to implement that, because obviously once we have all the infrastructure or all the information with us, and that too getting upgraded on a regular basis, it will definitely help new development and also making the existing developments greener.
Dr. Bhatia, last comments on proper waste management in the aviation industry.
Very, very important, I think, for water specifically, because there is a lot of water used at the airports. So I think putting the STPs, the sewage treatment plants, for that water to be reused, also for the recyclable and non-recyclable waste to actually do that. I don't think it is completely implemented in all the airports, specifically with the caterers, specifically with the other residual which actually happens from the airports. I think it's important that this is an important part of the document which is getting published right now. These are methodologies which other people with similar infrastructure, such as hotels, have actually implemented, and that too in proximity to the airports, to have them as zero emission or zero residual or zero pollution units. And I think it is easy, given the current technologies across the globe, to implement that for airports as well.
Right, absolutely. So proper waste management is of paramount importance. On that note, thank you so much for joining us. So the focus is on providing safe air travel by minimizing the adverse environmental impacts of civil aviation. That's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Rajya Sabha Television.